Have you ever wondered what happens when the world's most caring personality type just gives up on people? When that friend who always checked in on everyone suddenly goes radio silent. When the person who used to bend over backwards to make everyone comfortable just stops showing up altogether. Well, if you're an INFJ or you know one, you've probably witnessed this transformation firsthand. And let me tell you, it's not pretty. But it's also not what most people think it is. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most misunderstood aspects of the INFJ personality, that moment when they finally stop trying to be social. And trust me, when an INFJ reaches this point, everything changes. Not just for them, but for everyone around them too. So buckle up, because we're about to explore the journey from social butterfly wannabe to hermit extraordinaire, and why this shift might actually be the healthiest thing an INFJ can do. 1. The INFJ's social mask, playing a role they never auditioned for. Let's start with the elephant in the room. INFJs are naturally social creatures, despite what their behavior might suggest. They're introverts at heart, but here's the kicker. They're also people pleasers with an almost supernatural ability to read emotions and social situations. This creates a perfect storm of internal conflict. On one hand, they crave deep, meaningful connections. On the other hand, they find most social interactions draining and superficial. So what do? They put on a mask. This mask isn't just any ordinary social facade. It's a carefully crafted persona that's been years in the making. The INFJ studies people like a scientist studies lab rats. They observe, they analyze, they adapt. They become chameleons, shifting their personality to match what they think others want to see. But here's what most people don't realize. This process is exhausting. Imagine having to consciously think about every facial expression, every tone of voice, every response. It's like being an actor who never gets to leave the stage. The INFJ is constantly performing, constantly adjusting, constantly trying to be the perfect version of themselves for whoever happens to be in the room. The worst part? They're really good at it. So good that people often have no idea how much effort it takes. Friends and family see someone who's socially adept, empathetic, and engaging. They don't see the internal monologue that's running 24/7, analyzing every interaction for signs of approval or disapproval. This is why when an INFJ finally stops trying to be social, it catches everyone off guard. People think they know this person, but what they've been seeing all along is just a carefully constructed performance. 2. The breaking point, when enough is finally enough. Every INFJ has a breaking point. It might come after years of pretending, or it might hit them like a ton of bricks after one particularly draining social event. But when it comes, it's unmistakable. The breaking point usually happens when the INFJ realizes that all their social efforts haven't actually gotten them what they were looking for. They've spent so much time and energy trying to connect with people, trying to be the person everyone needs them to be, but they still feel fundamentally alone and misunderstood. It's like they've been speaking a foreign language their entire life, thinking they were communicating effectively, only to discover that no one understood a word they were saying. The realization is crushing and liberating at the same time. For some INFJs, the breaking point comes in the form of social burnout. They've given so much of themselves to others that there's nothing left. They feel emotionally depleted, spiritually bankrupt, and physically exhausted. The thought of having to put on that social mask one more time feels impossible. For others, it's a moment of clarity. They suddenly see their social interactions for what they really are, shallow exchanges that leave them feeling more isolated than before. They realize they've been settling for breadcrumbs when what they really crave is a full meal of authentic connection. The breaking point is often accompanied by what I call the social revelation. This is when the INFJ finally admits to themselves that they don't actually enjoy most social situations. They don't like small talk, they don't find parties fun, and they don't get energized by being around lots of people. This admission can be scary because it goes against everything society tells us about being a normal person. 3. The great social withdrawal, going ghost mode. Once an INFJ reaches their breaking point, something remarkable happens. They disappear. Not physically necessarily, but socially. They go into what I like to call ghost mode. This isn't the dramatic, attention-seeking kind of withdrawal that some people do when they want others to chase after them. This is quiet, deliberate, and often goes unnoticed at first. The INFJ simply stops initiating contact. They stop being the one who plans the get-togethers, who checks in on friends, who remembers everyone's birthdays and important events. They start declining invitations. Not with elaborate excuses or apologies, but with simple, polite refusals. Thanks, but I can't make it. They don't explain why, they don't suggest alternative plans, they just say no and move on. The INFJ's phone starts staying silent. They're not texting first anymore, they're not calling to catch up, they're not sending those thoughtful messages that they used to send just to brighten someone's day. Their social media activity drops off dramatically. Where they used to be the friend who always liked and commented on posts, now they're barely visible online. This withdrawal isn't done out of spite or anger, though others might interpret it that way. It's done out of self-preservation. The INFJ has finally realized that their social battery has been running on empty for far too long, and if they don't step back and recharge, they're going to completely burn out. The ghost mode phase can last anywhere from a few weeks to several years, depending on how deep the social fatigue runs and how much healing the INFJ needs to do. For the shock and confusion of others, where did they go? When an INFJ goes into social withdrawal mode, the people around them are often completely blindsided. Remember, most people have only ever seen the social mask, so this sudden disappearance doesn't make sense to them. Friends start to worry. Is everything okay? You seem distant lately. Family members get concerned. You never call anymore. Are you mad at us? Coworkers notice the change too. You used to be so chatty. What's wrong? The problem is that most people interpret the INFJ's withdrawal as a reflection of their relationship with them specifically. They think they've done something wrong, or that the INFJ is going through a difficult time and needs support. They don't realize that this withdrawal is actually a blanket response to social interaction in general. This leads to well-meaning but ultimately counterproductive attempts to fix the situation. People try to draw the INFJ back out of their shell with invitations, check-ins, and expressions of concern. They don't understand that this attention is actually making things worse, adding pressure and guilt to an already overwhelming situation. Some people get offended by the INFJ's withdrawal. They take it personally and respond with hurt or anger. Fine, if you don't want to be friends anymore, that's your choice. This reaction is particularly painful for the INFJ because it confirms their worst fears about relationships, that they're conditional and based on what you can give to others. The INFJ watches these reactions with a mixture of sadness and validation. Sadness because they genuinely care about these relationships and don't want to hurt anyone. Validation because the reactions prove that people were more interested in what the INFJ could do for them than in who the INFJ actually is as a person. 5. The inner transformation, rediscovering the true self. While everyone else is trying to figure out what happened to the old INFJ, something beautiful is happening on the inside. For the first time in years, maybe decades, the INFJ is getting to know themselves without the influence of others' expectations. This period of social withdrawal becomes a time of intense self-discovery. Without the constant pressure to perform socially, the INFJ can finally hear their own thoughts clearly. They start to remember who they were before they learned to be who others wanted them to be. They rediscover their interests, the ones they put on the back burner because they didn't align with their social circle's preferences. Maybe they're actually into obscure documentaries instead of popular TV shows. Maybe they prefer reading philosophy to gossiping about celebrities. Maybe they find more joy in a quiet walk in nature than in a crowded restaurant. The INFJ starts to understand their own energy patterns without the distortion of social obligation. They realize that they're not antisocial or broken, they're just wired differently. They need more alone time than most people, and that's not a character flaw, it's a biological reality. During this phase, many INFJs also start to examine their past relationships and social interactions with fresh eyes. They begin to see patterns they never noticed before, how they consistently prioritized others' needs over their own, how they attracted people who took more than they gave, how they said yes when they wanted to say no. This analysis isn't done with bitterness or resentment, but with the curiosity of a scientist examining data. The INFJ is trying to understand how they got to this point so they can make better choices moving forward. 6. Setting boundaries, learning to say no without guilt. One of the most significant changes that happens when an INFJ stops trying to be social is that they finally learn how to set boundaries. This is a skill that doesn't come naturally to most INFJs because they're hardwired to prioritize harmony and avoid conflict. But social withdrawal gives them the space and perspective they need to understand that boundaries aren't mean or selfish. They're necessary for mental health and authentic relationships. The INFJ starts small. Maybe they stop answering texts immediately, giving themselves time to formulate thoughtful responses instead of reactive ones. Maybe they start saying no to invitations that don't genuinely interest them, even if it means disappointing someone. This process is scary at first. Every boundary feels like a potential relationship ender. The INFJ worries that people will think they're being difficult or that they don't care about the relationship anymore. But slowly, they start to see that the relationships that can't survive healthy boundaries probably weren't that healthy to begin with. Learning to set boundaries also means learning to communicate needs more directly. Instead of hoping that others will magically understand what they need, the INFJ starts to express themselves more clearly. I need some time to myself this weekend. I'm not really in the mood for a long conversation right now. I'd prefer to meet for coffee instead of going to a party. This direct communication feels foreign at first, but it's incredibly liberating. The INFJ discovers that most people actually appreciate honesty, even if it's not what they want to hear. And the people who don't appreciate it? Well, that tells the INFJ everything they need to know about those relationships. 7. Quality over quantity, the new social strategy. When an INFJ finally emerges from their social withdrawal, and they usually do eventually, they don't go back to their old ways. Instead, they adopt a completely new approach to relationships and social interaction. The new strategy is simple: quality over quantity. Instead of trying to maintain dozens of surface-level relationships, the INFJ focuses on cultivating a few deep, meaningful connections. This means being more selective about who gets access to their time and energy. The INFJ starts to evaluate relationships based on reciprocity, authenticity, and mutual respect. They ask themselves questions like, does this person genuinely care about me as a person, or do they just like what I do for them? Do I feel comfortable being myself around this person? Does this relationship add value to my life, or does it just drain my energy? The INFJ also becomes more intentional about the types of social activities they engage in. Instead of saying yes to every invitation out of obligation, they choose activities that align with their interests and energy levels. They might prefer one-on-one conversations over group events, outdoor activities over crowded venues, or meaningful discussions over small talk. This shift often results in a smaller social circle, but the relationships within that circle are much more satisfying and sustainable. The INFJ finally experiences what they've been searching for all along: authentic connection with people who appreciate them for who they really are. 8. The ripple effect: how others adapt to the new INFJ. When an INFJ stops trying to be social and starts being authentic instead, it creates a ripple effect in all their relationships. Some people struggle to adapt to this change, while others embrace it wholeheartedly. The people who were primarily benefiting from the INFJ's people-pleasing behavior often have the hardest time with the transformation. They might push back against the new boundaries, complain about the INFJ being different or difficult, or try to guilt them back into their old patterns. These reactions are telling. They reveal that these relationships were based more on what the INFJ could provide than on genuine mutual affection and respect. While it's painful to realize this, it's also incredibly valuable information that helps the INFJ make better decisions about where to invest their energy. On the flip side, some people in the INFJ's life respond to the change with relief and admiration. They might say things like, "I'm so glad you're finally standing up for yourself," or, "I was wondering when you'd start saying no to things you don't want to do." These are often the people who saw through the social mask all along and were waiting for the real person to emerge. They become the foundation of the INFJ's new, smaller social circle. There's also a third group, people who are initially confused by the change but eventually come to appreciate the more authentic version of the INFJ. These are the relationships that have the potential to deepen and grow stronger over time. 9. The professional impact: how workplace dynamics change. The INFJ's social transformation doesn't just affect their personal relationships. It also has a significant impact on their professional life. In many ways, this is where the change is most noticeable because workplace interactions are often the most performance-based. The INFJ who used to say yes to every project, volunteer for every committee, and stay late to help overwhelmed colleagues starts to set professional boundaries. They begin to distinguish between what's actually their responsibility and what they've been taking on out of guilt or people-pleasing tendencies. This can be challenging in work environments that have come to rely on the INFJ's willingness to go above and beyond. Colleagues and supervisors might express surprise or concern when the INFJ starts prioritizing their own workload and well-being. But often, this change leads to better professional outcomes for the INFJ. By focusing on their core responsibilities and doing them well, rather than spreading themselves thin across multiple commitments, they often see improvements in their work quality and job satisfaction. The INFJ also becomes more selective about workplace relationships. Instead of trying to be friends with everyone, they focus on building genuine connections with colleagues who share their values and interests. This leads to more meaningful professional relationships and often results in better collaboration and job performance. 10. The mental health benefits: why this change is necessary. From a mental health perspective, The INFJ's decision to stop trying to be social is often a crucial step in their psychological well-being. The constant pressure to perform socially and meet others' expectations can lead to anxiety, depression, and burnout. When the INFJ finally gives themselves permission to be authentic, they often experience a significant reduction in stress and anxiety. They no longer have to maintain the exhausting vigilance that comes with constantly monitoring their social performance. The withdrawal period also provides much-needed time for emotional processing. INFJs are known for absorbing others' emotions and taking on their problems as their own. The social break gives them space to sort through these accumulated feelings and figure out which ones actually belong to them. Many INFJs report feeling more grounded and centered after going through this transformation. They develop a stronger sense of self and better emotional regulation skills. They also tend to become more resilient because they're no longer dependent on others' approval for their self-worth. This doesn't mean that the INFJ becomes completely antisocial or stops caring about others. Rather, they learn to care for others in a way that doesn't come at the expense of their own well-being. They discover that they can be empathetic and supportive without sacrificing their own needs. 11. Common misconceptions. What this transformation isn't. When people observe an INFJ going through this social transformation, they often misinterpret what's happening. Let's clear up some common misconceptions. First, this isn't antisocial behavior. The INFJ isn't rejecting all human connection. They're rejecting inauthentic connection. There's a big difference between not wanting to be around people at all and not wanting to be around people who don't appreciate your authentic self. Second, this isn't depression or a mental health crisis, although it might look like one from the outside. While some INFJs do struggle with mental health issues that contribute to social withdrawal, the transformation we're discussing here is more about healthy boundary setting and self-discovery. Third, this isn't a permanent state. Most INFJs don't become hermits forever. They use the withdrawal period to recharge and recalibrate, then re-engage with the world on their own terms. The difference is that their future social interactions are more intentional and authentic. Fourth, this isn't about being selfish or uncaring. INFJs who go through this transformation often become more caring and supportive in their relationships, not less. The difference is that they're caring for others from a place of strength rather than depletion. Finally, this isn't about giving up on people or becoming cynical about relationships. It's about developing realistic expectations and learning to invest energy where it's most likely to be appreciated and reciprocated. 12. The long-term outcome, a more authentic and sustainable life. So what happens in the long run when an INFJ stops trying to be social and starts being authentic instead? In most cases, the outcome is overwhelmingly positive. The INFJ develops a much healthier relationship with social interaction. Instead of seeing it as a performance or an obligation, they begin to view it as an opportunity for genuine connection. This shift in perspective makes social situations less stressful and more enjoyable. Their relationships become deeper and more meaningful. While they might have fewer friends than before, the friendships they do have are based on mutual understanding, respect, and authentic connection. These relationships are more satisfying and sustainable in the long term. The INFJ also develops better self-awareness and emotional intelligence. They understand their own needs and limitations better, which allows them to communicate more effectively and make better decisions about how to spend their time and energy. Professionally, many INFJs find that their career satisfaction improves when they stop trying to be everything to everyone. They might discover new interests or talents that were previously overshadowed by their focus on meeting others' expectations. Perhaps most importantly, the INFJ develops a stronger sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on external validation. They learn to value themselves for who they are, not just for what they can do for others. This doesn't mean that the journey is always easy or that there aren't setbacks along the way. Learning to be authentic after years of people-pleasing is a process that takes time and practice. But for most INFJs, the long-term benefits far outweigh the short-term discomfort. Conclusion. When an INFJ finally stops trying to be social, it's not an ending, it's a beginning. It's the beginning of a more authentic way of living, a more sustainable approach to relationships, and a healthier relationship with themselves. This transformation is often misunderstood by others, but it's actually one of the most psychologically healthy things an INFJ can do. By stepping back from the exhausting performance of trying to be what everyone else wants them to be, they create space to discover who they actually are. The journey from people-pleaser to authentic individual isn't always smooth, and it's not always popular with others. But for the INFJ, it's essential. It's the difference between living someone else's version of their life and living their own. If you're an INFJ who's going through this transformation, Know that what you're experiencing is normal and necessary. The discomfort of disappointing others is temporary, but the benefits of living authentically are lifelong. And if you know an INFJ who seems to have gone antisocial, try to understand that they're not rejecting you personally, they're just learning to prioritize their own well-being. The best thing you can do is respect their boundaries and let them know that you appreciate them for who they really are, not just for what they can do for you. In the end, when an INFJ stops trying to be social, they don't become less caring or less connected. They become more selective about where they direct their care and more intentional about their connections. And that, ultimately, leads to richer, more meaningful relationships for everyone involved. The world needs authentic INFJs, not performing ones. When an INFJ finally stops trying to be social and starts being real, everyone benefits, including the INFJ themselves.